to all of you for joining. Excited to see so many new names as well as familiar names in the attendee box, and very, very excited to have more people popping on every minute. For those of you who are new to CRES, welcome. We are so excited to have you and hope that you all have been having a wonderful start to the new year. Hard to believe it's only been 3 weeks of 2021. It feels like enough things have happened to fill at least 3 months, but nonetheless, we're very excited to be back here for our 2021 program. A little bit about CRES. The Denver chapter is just one of 5 chapters that exist across the state of Colorado. CRES is a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit, membership-based organization, and our mission is to support a 100% renewable Colorado through education programs like this, engagement and connection to networking opportunities across all Denver communities. Some of our values are renewables, emerging technologies, efficiency, diversity, inclusion, and community. So tonight, we are just going to go through a few chapter announcements, let some people trickle in here, and then in about 10 minutes or so, we will turn it over for our feature presentation of the evening, and we will wrap up with some question and answers. Because we are virtual here today, we appreciate you typing in your questions to the question box, and we will get to those, as many of them as we can, towards the end of the presentation. We also encourage you, if you are not already, to please become a member. It is very fun to join us, to have this wonderful network and community to support. You have access to not just the Denver chapter events, but events throughout the entire state. Our website is www.cres-energy.org. If you don't write it down right now, it will be at the bottom of the rest of my slides for reference. And if you want to stay in the loop about all of our future events, you can visit our meetup page, which is meetup.com/MetroDenverCRES. And we want to hear your feedback. It's been a long time since we've gotten to see you all in person, and we miss the opportunity to have that open sharing of ideas and information and feedback. So if you have suggestions for how we might improve our events, if you have suggestions for speakers that you'd like us to try to, have come to speak to you all, if you have ideas for how we can improve on diversity, inclusion, or any of our values, if you have content you want to hear, we want to hear it all, please feel free to email us at mdcres@cres-energy.org. And we also appreciate your support in financial ways as well as hearing your feedback. If you can and are able, you can donate at our website online, cres-energy.org/donate, or to our Venmo at MDCRES. Or if you are still doing a lot of online shopping in these COVID times, you can change your charity of choice on Amazon Smile to be CRES. Another announcement is that we encourage you all to go solar or to explore going solar. It is really easy to do for multiple reasons. We have a partnership as CRES with the Solar United Neighbors Co-op, which is a wonderful program. Actually, at our house, we are in the process of currently getting assessed to see if we are a good candidate for solar, and it has been easy and seamless and COVID safe. Another thing that is very exciting that happened just recently is that there is a 26% investment tax credit, also known as the ITC, for solar, and it was that credit was supposed to drop down this year, but actually now has been extended at that 26% rate through 2022, which means that 26% of your total project cost for a solar project can be claimed on your tax return the following year. So this is a great time to do it. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or would like more information. And another announcement, not necessarily specific to our chapter, but very, very related, of course, to the work that we strive to do. We are back in the Paris Agreement. For those of you who do not know, this is a legally binding treaty regarding climate change with a goal to limit our global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, if possible, below 1.5 degrees. So this was very exciting news for me this week. I hope that many of you who have these shared values, we're very excited to see that as well. And I am very excited to announce our February event is going to be with Bob Litterman. He is going to speak to us about climate risk for financial markets. He is the founding partner and chairman of the Risk Committee at Keepos Capital. He has done wonderful work with a diverse array of organizations trying to educate and advocate for action regarding climate change. He's talked about the risks that climate change pose for our financial markets and our economic future, not just in the U.S., but specifically focused on the U.S. here. So I hope that you will join us again next month and come prepared with questions. It will be the third Thursday, which is Thursday, February 18th at 7 p.m. right here from your couch or desk or kitchen or wherever you are joining us from. And without further ado, I am very, very excited for our main event tonight. We have a legislative primer all about Colorado legislative cycle with our own policy chair, Jonathan, also known as Johnny Rogers, and Representative Alex Valdez. I am so thankful to you both for joining us and can't wait to learn from both of you. So thank you very much. I will turn it over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you everyone for being here. It's awesome to see. We've got almost 70 attendees right now. People continue to jump on. And thanks so much, Representative Alex Valdez, for being here with us tonight. Alex represents Colorado's House District 5, which encompasses much of the urban core of Denver. He is also the chair of the Energy and Environment Committee and serves on the Transportation and Local Government and Capital Development Committees. So, Alex, I'd love to give you the opportunity to, introduce yourself a little bit more, talk a bit about your background. You founded a solar company. You're one of the leading voices on clean energy at the state legislature. I just want to hear you talk a little bit more about that and how you got to where you are today.
Well, thanks, Johnny. Can you hear me all right? Awesome.
Loud and clear.
Well, thank you for having me tonight. I've been, exposed to CRES for a very long time, the good work that its members do in making sure that we're pushing forward for a cleaner world. And I know we're all rejoicing in happiness about the changes that we've seen in the last few days in Washington, D.C. And hopefully this means good things not only for the industries that the membership represents, but for our planet in total. And so I've been very happy about that. Like Johnny said, my name is Alex Valdez. I represent House District 5, which is downtown Denver, the Lower Highlands, Lodo, RiNo, all of the does and O's, I say. A really dynamic district, a really interesting district in that it's hard to do a whole lot of renewables because it's a lot of high rises and interesting scenarios. So, but what is true of the district and has always been true of the district is that it's one of the most polluted areas in the United States. It's kind of the industrial core of Denver. And when I threw my hat into the ring to run for office, that environmental message really resonated because people had lived for so long with the effects of poison soil and air pollution and a number of things. And so, like Johnny said, I come from a background of renewable energy. I so I'll go back even further. I was gainfully employed working in the investment banking sector, and then 2008 came, and like so many people, I found myself unemployed. And I thought, hey, here's an opportunity for me to do something that I really love and, really be a champion for something that I care about. And first and foremost came to mind was the environment. Ever since I was a little kid, I was a conservationist. I would shut off the water and irritate my parents when they were washing dishes, and I was the door closing police and the heat turning it way down, making the house all cold and everything else. And I thought, this is my opportunity to do that. So I got involved with kind of the marketing side that grew and became what is now a large rooftop solar company here along the Front Range. And I was like, what's next? I guess you could say. I was thinking, I care so much about this. And the Speaker of the House at the time, Crisanta Duran was my representative, and I was speaking at an event at Roger Freeman's house of all places. For those of you who know him, he's a big climate guy. And she suggested to me, she said, "Hey, you would be good for office. You could really bring this perspective of what it's like to do renewables in real life to the Capitol." And I thought, no, I don't want to do that. I'm happy with my life. And but I got to thinking about it, and I thought, it actually really is important to have voices who understand the different aspects of what we do. From, we hear a lot about climate, but we also are talking about being job creators and infrastructure updaters, and we're making investments in just some of the raw pieces of financial core of the state, the higher education institutions. And so I relented, and I said, I'm going to do it. And I got into the primary, and it was a 6-way primary, which was the biggest in the state. And I was a glutton for punishment. Ended up in the largest primary. Primaries are hard because you're running against people who you like. I mean, everybody's kind of the same. So how do you differentiate yourself? And what won the day for me was having this track record of actually making change, making environmental change, and really, kind of bringing all of those pieces together. So got elected, like Johnny said, I got appointed to Energy and Environment, Transportation and Local Government, and the Capital Development Committee. And just this year, I was made chair of the Energy and Environment Committee, which is a great honor given that I'm only, thank you very much, going into my 2nd term. And usually that's one of the most sought after positions at the state capitol. I'm really honored to have it because I bring that perspective of understanding kind of what does the environment need, what do the enviros want, and how can we create business opportunities to employ Coloradans in this field. And so I'm tremendously honored to do that, but I also serve on the CDC, and while it doesn't seem like very much of an environmental committee, we make the decisions about the state capitol, so state buildings, higher education buildings. And one of the things I'm really, and I'll talk about this later, I guess, when we get into more Q&A, is one of my goals is to really advance the state buildings to a net zero standard, and hoping to achieve that this year so that all new projects that we build are built to net zero, because that's a simple standard for different institutions to work towards. And so I'm excited about the work we're going to do this year. I'm sure many of you saw the governor's roadmap updates the other day, and we're going to be putting some teeth behind it. So that's the long politician speak way around, like, hey, how did I get here? And I'll kick it back over to you, Johnny.
Thanks. Yeah, on some future questions, I may have to start cutting you off, but I'll let you run with it to get going. And I'm just so excited that you are in the legislature, that we have your voice there. For folks who have been to our events before, they may know I also work for the city and county of Denver in our Office of Climate Action, and we have really ambitious targets. And it's a lot easier for Denver to make progress on our objectives when we have people like Alex at the Capitol who can actually pass laws that we can then turn around, try to implement, really support each other in our objectives. So like you said, you're in your 2nd term, you really came in and made a splash. The 2019 session was absolutely historic. We saw bills that required greenhouse gas reductions, Public Utilities Commission reform, oil and gas reform, modernization of community solar gardens, transportation electrification planning, building code requirements, appliance energy and water efficiency standards. So many different things happened. And your name was on most of those bills as a sponsor or as a leading proponent. So what are some of the things you're most proud of from that first session? What were the things that we were really able to accomplish, and what was still left on the table that we need to come back for and continue to make progress on?
Well, that's a great question. And, one of the things that I've learned very quickly from my short time in politics is that traditionally we're incrementalists. We're just kind of chipping away at getting towards a larger goal. And 2019 saw this opportunity because there was such a large group of new representatives that I came in with. There were there were 16 new representatives, and we were elected kind of out of this. We were born out of this real rejection of where the country was at the time, and just this real demand to really shift and go in a completely different direction. And when we walked through the door, we said, we didn't get elected to just chip away at this or talk in platitudes. We really wanted to come in swinging and make big things happen. We were met with some reality. One of the realities is Colorado is a very local control sort of situation state, where we don't have a statewide building code like they do in California. We don't have a lot of those frameworks that other states can really build the things that we want to achieve around. And so we had to get creative about like each and every piece of this. We were going to go the building codes because that pushes local governments to do things a little bit differently. And then people who had been there 7 years before I ever even thought of running for office had been working on huge pieces of policy like the oil and gas reform bill and 1061, which was the greenhouse gas bill. And those were really just saying, let's put into law, for lack of a better term, a statement about where we want to go. And now the next few years are going to be about how do we get there? What are the actual pieces of legislation? But what am I most proud of? I think the sum total of what we've been able to achieve, and I know that's a pretty generic answer, but no one of these things does it. It's going to be 15 or 20 or 30 bills that take me years to do as a representative that I can look back and say that really brought together a lot of different pieces of this puzzle and made big change for Colorado and for the future.
Yeah, it really does take these holistic solutions, and there's so many things that we could be talking about tonight, but as always, time is limited, so we may have to jump around a bit. Before we jump into what's on the docket for 2021 for this upcoming session, I do want to talk a bit about COVID. I mean, 2020, we were coming off of the momentum of 2019. I think a lot of really strong bills were introduced and working their way through the process. And then COVID happens. A lot of disruption, but also lays bare a lot of environmental injustice, social injustice, just huge kind of disparities in inequity. And so how has COVID kind of shaped your thinking and that of your colleagues? How do we respond to it? How do we use energy transition and other tools to help address some of these issues that we've seen and really come back stronger? So how does COVID factor into your thinking now?
Question. So obviously COVID came as just a shock to the system. We were not expecting a situation where we would go from kind of riding the high of the budget surpluses and just a boom economy and making progress to essentially being at a standstill. But like you said, COVID really shined a light on inequity, and it's something that we have to address now, because when we talk about environmental justice, that's not just a statement. That itself shines a light on the situation that we face, which is that the reason that my district is not only contains the most polluted zip code in the United States, it's one of the poorest zip codes too. And these things go together, and it's just a system of inequity that we need to continue to address. So I think the key, and what COVID's really done is it said, well, health and environment are integrated. We know that. A lot of people don't know that, but we know that. And second, that the impacts of climate change, the impacts of the pollution, the impacts of all of the different things that we're talking about are going to hit those same people who are dying at higher rates of COVID because they have lack of access to health infrastructure. And so access is the key. Access right now means we have to find a way to bring renewables, the technologies that we all work with and believe in and deal with. We have to make those accessible to people who traditionally haven't been able to have them. And that's the opportunity I think we face. I think from a fundamentals of government's place, there might be a real windfall in a sense from COVID from a financial perspective. Our expectation is that the Biden administration is going to make great investments into this sector. And when they do, we as state legislators will be able to draw that money down and allocate it to communities based on kind of some of these equity metrics. And so I think it's exciting on so many levels what happened. I guess it was just yesterday. I mean, yeah, and you know, we are now in charge of the U.S. government. We have to be good stewards of that. We have to make these investments, but we will have chances to draw that money down into these communities, and that's an exciting way to emerge from what has been a long-standing historical injustice where, you know, poor folks, people of color, traditionally live in these more polluted areas.
Yeah, we certainly have a lot of responsibility with the new layout of government, but also a lot of opportunity to take some big strides forward. And one piece of that puzzle in helping to connect families to energy efficient services and solar and things that can increase the comfort and quality of their homes, the concept I've seen floating around is called pay as you save, which I understand that you've been involved with. And so for folks who are unfamiliar with the concept, I'll do my best to give a little one-liner here and then let you correct me. So it would actually enable your utility to make the investment in your solar panels or in your more energy efficient electric water heater or different things that you can use to help lower your utility bill and increase the comfort of your home. And then those savings that you would receive compared to your inefficient, what you were doing before, a portion of those savings can then pay back the utility for that investment. So the utility it's a good business opportunity for them. You as the customer save money, and we're using less electricity and we're transitioning towards a clean energy future. Is that how that works, and kind of what's the impetus behind bringing like this forward?
Yeah, so this was a new concept that I actually just learned about this year, but when I first heard about it, and I think you hit kind of the general points of how it works very well, but it reminded me initially of a program that I came across when I was a newbie in the solar industry and was doing marketing campaigns in Northern California, and it was called PACE, P-A-C-E, which was Property Assessed Clean Energy, which was a program where you could essentially get solar or do retrofits for weatherization, and it would be essentially added to your tax bill, and the guarantor would be the local government that collected your taxes. PAYS is very similar to that, except for rather than it being a tax-based situation, it's an on-utility bill recovery. And why it makes sense is because the utility can do things that the private sector cannot. For instance, the utility can borrow money at a very low interest rate, even compared to what we're seeing in the marketplace right now, which is historically low, because they're essentially a monopoly, and monopolies they don't really exist in this context. And so, but they're a very safe bet for those who want to make investments, so they can raise these bonds. The reason I like PAYS, P-A-Y-S, pay as you save, is because it represents access. You don't have credit scoring and some of the other, income requirements, some of the other things that preclude people from being able to partake in renewables wouldn't really occur here. So it's a great opportunity to create some access. It's a big deal. It's going to be a hard go, mostly because the utility doesn't like being told what to do, even though they belong to us. And we as a Public Utilities Commission and legislature sets the rules, tells them what to do. It still doesn't ever go well. So we're excited to get started on that, and hopefully it'll end up with a program that can help increase access. That's my hope. And we know that.
And similar to that, you were mentioning how, PACE was this innovative financing mechanism. And there were some challenges with PACE rollouts around the country, particularly in the residential PACE, with some predatory contractors who would go out and take advantage of people, make investments that didn't necessarily have a good payback. How is PAYS structured differently to avoid some of those kind of predatory practices? What are the safeguards that it inherently brings?
Well, that's a good question. I think that's something that we're working out. And you have to run these traps as you're kind of formulating a piece of energy. But one of the things we've discussed already was how we can bring the energy office, used to be the governor's energy office, now it's the Colorado energy office, to help kind of administrate, and I don't know if that's the right word, I might have just flubbed it, but to administer the program in such a way that you have, trustworthy contractors and people involved that, are using folks that are NABCEP certified or some generally accepted industry quality measure, and, weighting and bonding and all those things. So it has to have those consumer protections. It's a great point. And, finding a way to do that in such a way that protects the consumer, but still leaves it open for competition, that's kind of the unique eye that I bring to it. And sometimes people don't like that because I'm saying, well, I don't know if we want the, monopoly utility getting into the private sector here, but we need to work it to where, we're addressing a problem and we are building a piece of legislation that will enable the best possible program to give, folks who work in the renewable sector work, but also protect the consumer. So that's part of making the sausage, as they say.
Right, and I'm hopeful that something like this, I certainly have my opinions about the pros and cons of a monopoly utility infrastructure, but having something that can have that oversight from the Public Utilities Commission and all the various interveners who would help to oversee the PAYS program, ensure that any investments are guaranteeing savings for those customers and really prioritizing that accessibility and value for low and moderate income households. And I think something I've seen that's really good about this, you don't have to be a homeowner. You can be a renter, you can be a business, and there's still ways to get those improvements made so that you can benefit from them. I'm excited about it, and I look forward to seeing what's ultimately introduced and continuing to provide feedback to make sure that this is really strong to the benefit of all Coloradans. So I want to jump ahead now. Another set of bills that you had introduced in 2020 before the COVID disruption was looking at banning single-use plastics. So tell me a little bit about this effort and kind of why is this important? Are you preparing to kind of relaunch this in this session? And what, if anything, has changed from your initial efforts in 2020?
Yeah, so this is a big one. So in 2020, myself and Representative Emily Sirota introduced a comprehensive Plastic Pollution Reduction Act bill that we said, we don't have a chance of passing this bill. We just want to get the conversation started. So it's called a messaging bill. Then we introduced it and all of a sudden we're like, wait, this can pass. And then COVID hit. We had worked thousands of hours and we had gotten this bill and worked with every stakeholder, Target, Walmart, restaurants, everybody to get this thing to the point of passability. Surprisingly, what has changed is that when we talked about bringing this back this year, it has gone from we don't like the idea of a plastic ban, we'll do it on our own sometime in the future, to yeah, it's going to pass. Let's just make it good. And so in a matter of 2 years since I arrived, it's gone from being kind of like a cool messaging bill to we think 2021 is going to be the year when we actually pass a comprehensive piece of plastic pollution legislation. And there's a lot of different political traps you have to run. Is now the time with COVID? And I tell people this all the time. Change is always hard, but when you find yourself at a low point, which I think economically, we may be, we're in a really hard time. We're recovering from a disastrous federal administration. We're at a point where we can redefine what we're going to do. And as an environmentalist, it's not just renewable energy. It's not just carbon. It's this stuff too. It's the plastic in the gutter going down into the creek. It's the plastic bags stuck in my trees that have been up there for years that just remind me every time I leave my house how much I dislike single-use plastics. And it's the billions of water bottles and everything else that are ending up in the ocean. And so we have to be comprehensive about how we change the way we live going forward. And I really do believe that this will be the year that we're able to take some really substantial action on plastic pollution. And, you know, I'll bring this up again because you talked about environmental justice earlier. And one of the things we heard when we brought this bill was, you know, getting rid of plastic bags is going to hurt poor people. And I said, that's funny, because when I was canvassing and running for office, most of the plastic pollution that I saw was in their neighborhoods, all over the ground, all in the trees, everywhere. And so we ran our traps, we talked to everybody, and almost unanimously people said, hey, it's time to move forward. And again, we have to be comprehensive about how we approach plastic pollution, because what's happened in California, for instance, or what happened initially was people switched to paper, which was a whole other environmental problem. And so we really have to be very thoughtful about how we go about alternatives, and people are going to forget their reusable bags, and you know, so we're really thinking this through. And I think when it's all said and done, Colorado is going to have the best piece of plastic pollution reduction policy. And Denver had already taken steps to do it before. But you know, don't tell anybody. It wasn't legal, because we do have a preemptive statute on the state level that prevents local governments from passing laws regarding plastic, which exists long before my time. But we'd like to see the whole state move to that level of conservation and then go from there. And we think it's going to get done this year. So I'm really excited about it.
That's really exciting. I'm kind of just almost trying to speculate a little bit here. You know, what has changed for people mentally? I mean, I feel like every time I've seen, you know, plastic bans come up on the ballot, they always, you know, it's a messaging bill. It's something that people are trying to make a statement, and then it falls flat, or it's not practical for implementation. And like you said, change is hard, but as hard as, you know, COVID has been, this past year has been, I think people have really proven their resilience and probably have recognized that a lot of things do need to change. So what do you think has really triggered that shift in mentality from people who are pushing for this and the big organizations that might have been the biggest opponents from this a couple of years ago?
Great question. Honestly, I think that millennials and younger generations growing up and becoming consumers is driving the change. There are obviously plenty of people from all spectrums of age groups who care very much about this issue, but the truth is that as consumerism rises amongst those born, I would say 1990 and later, it's different. It's not an option for them, and it's just not going to fly. And retailers and restaurants and all of those who've been multi-generational purveyors of these plastics are starting to realize we have to appeal to this customer base, and this customer base cares very much. And you know, I'm a little more old school. I kind of fall in that gap between being a millennial and Generation X or whatever it was. And you know, I think that's important because you can kind of see what the arguments for and against are. But the truth is, I think that it's consumer shift, and that by creating legislation, we create standardization, which from a business perspective is what they're after. You know, you don't want one rule in Denver and another rule over here, and another rule over here. That gets expensive from if you're a Target or, you know, fast food restaurant or something like that. So you really need a standard, and we're trying to create a kind of a minimum standard that will get us away from just digging. I guess the thing that I thought of is we dig stuff up, we turn it into something, and then we bury it. And I thought that cycle, it just won't work. And the other good thing that we're hoping to achieve with this program is to create a little bit of revenue that local governments can use to create recycling programs, so we can increase our rates of recycling, and creating down cycle marketplace. So what can we do with used plastic? What can we do like we do with paper and cardboard to make it into other things, and how can we provide revenue to local governments to do that? So very interesting area of legislation that I hadn't worked in prior. You know, obviously I was more into energy and things like that, but it's just as important, and we have to do it now because there's always going to be a reason to not do it. And I think a lot of people have just had enough of excuses.
That's great. And I kind of want to jump ahead a little bit here to talk then, millennials, people exercising their voice, being loud, voting with their dollars, helping to catalyze change in this particular instance. As we look at the legislative process, all the things that you're working on, a lot of our members, they always ask, how can they make their voices heard? How can they, wield some power and help to continue to influence us in this direction, or be able to help tweak things and share their perspectives? As someone who's now in the legislature, what do you see as the most effective ways for people to really have their voices heard and participate in the process?
Well, I mean, you could get crazy like me and run for office and win and come in there and help make some change. That's the greatest thing you can do. And I do recommend that. I really do. I think that far too often people think that politicians are mythical creatures, more like gargoyles or something, because we're not always super popular. But the truth is that I think that lobbying is important, and knowing what your representation is how they're representing you at the Capitol. The one thing we have to do as representatives is respond to our constituents. That is our job. We are representatives, and representing means you hear the voices of the people that live in your community. It's especially poignant, I think, with the political divides that have arisen in this country over the past 15, 20 years, however long it's been, to remind people that when it comes to energy, when it comes to environment, it shouldn't really be so partisan. So if you have a representative who is a frequent standing as an obstructionist in the way of this environmental policy, call them or come to the Capitol once you get your vaccine and talk to them. I mean, lobby them. Tell them that you're not satisfied with their answers on why they keep taking no votes on things that are important to you and your children. And send your children, because kids are very effective lobbyists, because nobody can resist being nice to kids, and kids will tell it like it is. And boy, I've had the Riot Act read to me by kids before, and I love it, because it's like, wow, you just don't have a filter, and I just love that. But most of the time, thankfully, they're saying thank you for trying to make the world livable when I grow up. And but I digress. Lobbying, calling, showing up in person once that building belongs to you. We just work there, and so there's a lot of paid lobbyists in the building, and they're all, like, I'm paid by this person, I'm paid by this person. But what's the best kind of lobbyist is the free kind, the people who just care about an issue. And so I recommend coming up to the Capitol or giving your representative a call, especially if they've voted against legislation that you care about. And if they vote for it, call them and say thank you. I mean, that helps them to know that they're making the right decision for their community.
Great. Thanks very much for all that advice, and thanks for talking while I was able to recover my audio as my phone hung up on me and I had to dial back in. So I got the start and the end. It was all great. I assume the middle was fantastic as well. I want to jump back now to some of the policies that we're seeing and things that are upcoming. So one of the fruits of the legislation passed in 2019 is requirements that utilities file a clean energy plan with the Public Utilities Commission, calling for an 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030 compared to their 2005 baseline. Xcel Energy, which serves Denver, is expected to file on March 31st. So what are you hoping to see in that clean energy plan? And how much farther do you think we can go past that 80% reduction target? I really consider it a floor. What are you expecting?
The minimum is what I'm expecting, and that's okay, because we as a legislature have the power to change what those plans look like. And I think that it's always strange for people to hear from me that those things are important, but the fact of the matter is that as a publicly regulated utility, and that regulatory authority that is the PUC answers to the legislature, it is our job to create mandates that they have to abide to. That said, I think I'll speak specifically to Excel. They're kind of in the same boat as some of those retailers that we talked about on plastic, where they understand that their consumer base is changing too, and that's why they've led with this. We're going to be 100% renewable. We're getting there fast. We're doing the best. And truth be told, compared to some utilities, they are doing a good job. But what I'd like to see as far as fundamental pieces is a little more on transportation electrification stuff, trying to get some rebate. I think storage. I think they need to be doing a little bit more on storage and demand management side. I also, I'd like to see if federal dollars are drawn down by any utilities for renewable programs. I'd like to see the RES or some sort of a new REC program arise if Congress is able to take action and create put some real value behind renewable energy credits. And so I'd like to see consumers get a piece of that, because ultimately, my belief, and this is, a lot of people are like, what? But my belief is that renewables are best when people own some of them, and when they're all not controlled by companies. And so I'd like to see an expansion of kind of the people's ability to produce some of the power, whether that be farmers who change their crops over to solar and sell it back, or whatever. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to include more people in kind of the upside. But just to answer the question plainly, if we don't like what happens at the PUC, we will address that in legislation.
That's great. Yeah. So
yeah.
So I was doing Denver's clean energy accounting as part of our climate action work, and was a little surprised and disappointed to see that only 1.2% of Denver's electricity comes from distributed solar and community solar gardens. And like you said, I think there's a huge opportunity to empower local residents, local businesses to be contributors to this clean energy future. We have the technologies now where we can develop this distributed clean energy. We can store it and dispatch it when it's needed. With electric vehicle charging, we can manage kind of the flow of those electrons and demand and help to balance out some of the variability in clean energy resources. And with Denver's efforts to update building codes towards more of a net zero energy future, we want to have grid flexible electric water heaters and other systems that can really respond to the grid needs. So I'm hopeful to see that. I'm excited to hear that you'll be watching that process intently. And if you're not satisfied, then able to go in and make corrections. And so I'm curious, there's another bill that'll be coming up this session, which really I think at its heart is about utility accountability and optionality for communities, the PUC study of community choice energy. And so for folks who don't know, community choice energy, similar to community choice aggregation, which has been in other states, would give a community the ability to opt in to, say, buy their electricity from another provider while their existing utility continues to manage the distribution infrastructure, the poles and wires. Have you been involved with this bill, or kind of what are your thoughts on its role in helping to continue to drive utility accountability and present options to communities that might be interested in this approach?
Yeah, so I was involved with that bill as a member of the committee that heard it, and as a good close friend and ally of the representative who ran it, who is Edie Hooten. And I followed, she represents Boulder proper, and Boulder for a number of years has been pursuing strategies to get there quicker. They were going to municipalize, and that was a long drawn out fight, but they're looking for strategies to get things done quicker. And when we put out broad mandates and then the utility puts out plans that take 10 or 15 years, we're just not getting there quick enough. So I'm a supporter of studying what the effect of CCA, community choice aggregation, could be. I've seen it in California. I keep saying California, don't tell anybody, I'll get in trouble with the other side. But they've been doing it for a long time. And I think, funny story, I'll tell you, I was in the hallway when we were hearing that bill, and a couple of members of the opposition party were around the corner, and I overheard them saying, could we use community choice aggregation to create only buying fossil fuel? And I thought, oh, that's crazy. That's pretty sly, but we need to close that loophole, because I do believe there are communities that would have used it to create a commission that only bought coal-powered fuel to make a point. So it's an interesting concept. It's something that the utility really doesn't like, obviously, which is probably, when it comes to environment side, is not the worst thing ever. But you know, my general theory is, yeah, let's study it. Let's see what we can do to expedite the amount of time it's going to take us to get to a clean energy future.
More information is good. More options that we might be able to put in our arsenal. And speaking of, you know, the need for options, so you brought up the greenhouse gas reduction roadmap that the governor's office put out last week or maybe 2 weeks ago. And, you know, there's, I think, a lot of optimism in there, a lot of confidence that, you know, we have identified opportunities to reduce emissions in a big way in the electric sector, put new regulations on oil and gas that can take big steps on transportation, on buildings, on all these different parts of the economy. But there is still criticism that we lack enforceability. Or we're kicking, the regulators have the ability to start putting in controls, but are going too slow. So what are the things that you're looking at that in the roadmap were really exciting, and where you were talking, where do we put in more teeth to really make sure that we hit these targets?
Yeah, so there was a press conference last Thursday that I joined, and one of the things that I said was, you know, this plan is great, but it needs teeth. We have to actually have some mandates here. It's not enough just to say, let's get there, and then, you know, walk away, which I don't think is the intent, but mandates are not easy for statewide elected officials like the governor to really undertake. But in consultation, that's our job. That's the legislature's job, is to take a bold plan like that. And Governor Polis has done an amazing job of setting a course and embracing what we need to be doing. He's been our best governor ever in terms of you know, really caring about making an actual roadmap to reducing greenhouse gases. And while I think that he's fallen short of being perfect, the truth of the matter is that's our job. That's what legislators are for, and that's what the system is set up to work like, so that we take and look at what are his goals and how do we get there. As far as specifics about the plan, I'm always very concerned with the building side of things, because the reductions of emissions from buildings is not great. It's an expensive prospect, but they're massive. Buildings are massive emitters of carbon pollution and just users of energy. A lot of the carbon reduction was really focused on the oil and gas industry and other areas, and the buildings was, you know, they wanted a 5 or 6% improvement over the next 10 years, and that's a round number, but I was like, we have to do better than that. And so I think the legislature really needs to really focus our work on the transportation sector and reducing the carbon footprints of buildings themselves, because if we only do what's proposed in the updated roadmap, we're not going to make much of an impact on the greenhouse gas emissions that our buildings are having. And so I think building standards for new buildings, because Colorado is thankfully growing like crazy, and it gives us an opportunity to build better buildings as we're growing. But, you know, establishing standards for how we can really reduce the footprint of buildings by, you know, embracing concepts like beneficial electrification, benchmarking. Denver has a great benchmarking program. I think that's something that we're going to try and get done on the state level. And then we need to really drive the adoption of electrified vehicles. And that's been one of my favorite subjects, and I get laughed at a lot for it. But the truth is I mean, I represent a district that is surrounded by I-70, I-25. I mean, there's just so much vehicle emission that's causing asthma and other health problems, that I don't think we should overlook the amount of carbon savings we can get from really embracing progressive transportation policy. And I think there'll be an opportunity for that this year. And I'll probably be irritating the reps who are bringing, transportation funding bills. So I'll say it's not good enough unless we're doing something to lower emissions as part of the plan. And so buildings and transportation are the areas. And I think, it's exciting because that means I know what kind of bills I'm going to be running.
That's exciting. So before we get to my 2 closing questions for you, and then we've got a ton of questions in the Q&A that I'm excited to start jumping into. I'll just rattle off a few of the other bills that we're expecting to see coming. You mentioned building and transportation electrification. So beneficial electrification, I think a big attention that we're really excited about. I know some of our CRES members have been working on updating demand-side management program metrics and really promoting clean heating standards, commercial building benchmarking and energy performance standards, and also a renewable natural gas standard, which has been met also with some hesitation from a lot of our members as to whether or not that just perpetuates natural gas infrastructure and use. And, do we need that bridge, or are there impossible to electrify sectors where that's going to be important? And how do we make sure that we're really targeted with any renewable natural gas that ends up being used in Colorado, while completely solving the problems of decarbonization where we can? So I think we're at a point where bridge solutions can only take us so far given the time we have, and we need to be really spanning the gap here.
Yeah, so skip it. I think skip it. But it's easier said than done, because you're talking about a lot of folks who work in the natural gas sector. And so it's really more of an economic question and transitionary, helping to find folks that find their natural gas work not as fruitful or gone altogether. We have to think about those things and how we're going to create opportunities in the electrification side that create jobs and good paying jobs. Otherwise, it's going to be a harder road to walk. But I would agree. I think it's skip it. I've really gotten in lately to the DOE net zero standard, because it's like, well, you can build a building that's kind of not that great, but you have to offset what it uses with renewables so that it ends up being kind of a balance. And while I don't like that philosophy of doing it that way, I think it actually just leads people to build buildings that are also, very energy efficient and, kind of offset their own footprint. And I think if we begin to look at it on a building by building basis and how each building's footprint can be adjusted or offset, and especially when we're building those new buildings, we're taking great strides. And I think that we need to be an example as a state. We should stop building buildings that are not meeting that standard as a state. Our education institutions, which receive state funding, they should lead the charge on this as well. They're obviously catering to student bodies that are saying, hey, we really care about the future. We're young. And so there's some opportunities to really start this and kind of prove out models, and then hopefully get to a point where we pair beneficial electrification with, because I grew up in Southeast Aurora, and some of my friends had electric homes, all electric homes, and it was just very cold, and their bills were very high. So we have to really balance, how do we make electricity at a good price and then use it for what we're using fossil fuel now. And I think we have to approach it with that balance. Otherwise, we fall victim to the narrative of beneficial electrification could cost a fortune, or they tried that in the 70s and these houses are just not reselling because they're so expensive to operate, etc. So we really have to take a balanced perspective on it, but we're going to be doing some of that stuff this year, I think.
Great, that's exciting. So now, closing 2 questions for you till we jump in the Q&A, and you may have already answered this one from your statements, but first, what do you see as the most significant challenge to decarbonizing Colorado?
Well, I think access to capital is always going to be the hardest part. We live in a system where certain people have access to money, and these things cost money. And so in order to retrofit or remodel or do whatever, you have to have access to those resources. And so I think that we have to find innovative ways to finance this transition and to bring these things along. I think that's it. I mean, I'm just looking at it from my history kind of in the private sector and saying, the hardest thing to do is not to get someone to believe that it's better to get their power from solar versus, you know, the utility. It's hard for people to, you know, either have the money or qualify for the loan. And that's the area where I've always thought we could do better, is creating access to capital as a state, whether that be issuing bonds and things of that nature. We're just so hamstrung with Tabor, which for those of you who don't know, Colorado, we can't raise taxes, so we can't really fund. We have a very hard time finding ways to fund new programs. And so we have to be creative and see if we can't find ways to bring private sector dollars into this space to really flood the market with capital so that all individuals, all businesses, all utilities have the ability to make this transition.
Yeah, that's really insightful. That accessible capital, just so important and such a barrier. And hopefully something like PAYS can really help solve one piece of that problem as we look at those comprehensive solutions for all people in every sector. And then so the second question, in what way are you the most optimistic about Colorado's energy transition?
Well, I mean, I'm born and raised, and one of the things that makes Colorado so special is that one of the things we pretty much all of us share is a connection to the environment. Whether you're a skier, snowboarder, you just like to go to the mountains, you like to go camping in the summer. We have perfect summers, mild. We just have a great environment, and that to me, it makes me optimistic for people's desire to preserve that and to look for innovative ways to change the way we live our lives that are less impactful to the place that we love. And so, and I genuinely believe that that is a notion that is shared by all, not just one party or the other. I mean, some people are sportsmen and they like to go up and hunt and fish, and some people like to ski and snowboard, but we all share something in common, and that is that we don't want to live in a polluted hellhole, for lack of a better term, 20 years from now. And so I believe that we have a real opportunity to embrace, you know, these policies that are going to get us there, and that, you know, we as legislators can only help to enable that. I think the desire is already there.
Inspiring. Good way to take us into our Q&A with the audience. Thank you so much to everyone that submitted questions. We've got quite a few here. I'll do my best to get through them. And the way that I would like to do it is I will call on your name. I'm just going to go in the order in which I see people who popped their question in, give you the ability to unmute yourself and ask your question. If you can't figure out how to unmute, then I'll ask your question for you or move on to the next person. But it would be great to hear your voices. So the first one that we had was from Ron Larson, and I've unmuted you. You can unmute yourself, and yeah, go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks very much, Johnny. For Alex, is there any chance for Colorado to have new legislation that's addressing carbon dioxide removal, sometimes called greenhouse gas removal, etc.? Over.
So I think I heard the question correctly. I'm wondering if this is the same, and this is not my wheelhouse on a day-to-day basis, but if I have heard that there is a lot of movement on sequestration. I don't know if that's the same concept area, but you know, there are so many different legislators with so many different areas of expertise, and I wish that I could give a better answer, but I know that I have heard a lot of talk about sequestration of different greenhouse gases and technology it's getting ahead of what we actually have been budgeting our investments towards. And so the Energy Office, the Governor's Energy Office, is really interested in trying to unlock more funding to really invest in those areas of carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and the reduction of other greenhouse gases.
Alex, if I could just add, putting carbon dioxide liquid or somehow getting compressed carbon dioxide deep underground is considered sequestration. That I don't approve of. I don't think it's the right thing to do. I'm thinking of something called biochar. Over.
Any thoughts on biochar?
I don't know about it. So, like I said, I'll tell you one thing about this job is you learn something new every day. I will look into it, but like I said, I think there's probably other representatives who are working more with that. I didn't even really exactly understand how sequestration works. You made it a little more clear to me. So I hate to give the vague answer, but it's better than me answering incorrectly, and that is to say I just don't know what is being done on that, and maybe you should run for the state house and help us get there.
Sounds good. Thanks for that question, Ron. The next one was from Michael Howie. Not sure if I pronounced your last name right. I apologize. You can unmute yourself.
Hoy is how I pronounce it. So Howie is sort of close. I actually have two things in your chat. I'll address both of them now. One was just a quick note for Alex's education, which is that electric heat in the 1970s, which of course is still in use today, was resistance heat. Basically 1 watt in, 1 watt of heat out, or $1 in, $1 that you spend. Electrification now uses technologies like heat pumps. So 1 watt in, you get 3+ watts of heat out. So it costs less than a third what it used to cost. My question is, in recovering from COVID-19, can we finally get rid of the last remnants of Tabor?
Well, that's great questions. So as to your first point, I think that it's just a narrative that gets used against electrification a lot. I think, a lot of folks, just need to have their education level and awareness brought up to speed about what these new technologies are and how they're much better in ground source heat pumps and just heat pumps in general are really taking off. I've seen a lot of the Mitsubishi kind of easy to install heat pumps going into new homes actually, and so that's a cool area. As far as Tabor, it's a strange thing because it's constitutional, so it's up to the people of the state of Colorado to repeal it. And so what would have to happen is there'd have to be a ballot initiative to repeal Tabor. There's nothing that we as a legislature can do to repeal it, and in some weird way, we're not really allowed to because we have an oath to the Constitution, and since the voters of the state of Colorado said this should be in our Constitution, I'm in a strange way, and I don't, but I'm weirdly obliged to not involve myself with this destruction. So please go and petition and let's get rid of Tabor, because if we were rid of Tabor, we wouldn't be 48th in the United States in education. We wouldn't be, falling behind on transportation infrastructure. There are so many things we could achieve, and I hoped that would happen in 2020. I thought that was the perfect ballot to repeal Tabor, and I feel like we may have missed an opportunity. But I'd certainly be a yes vote on a repeal.
Thanks for the constitutional lesson, and Michael, thank you for volunteering to go out and collect signatures for the repeal effort. We really appreciate you.
Well, I was actually hoping that the legislature could refer a ballot initiative. I believe that is also constitutionally allowed.
We could, but we would need a 3/4 majority, and we're just a little short. So we may be able to in the future, but it requires, and here's the thing, every time we have asked a tax raise question or referred a measure, with the exception of 2020 where we repealed the Gallagher Amendment, we've been rejected for transportation funding, for education funding. Every single tax initiative that we've run has failed, and I think it's just really discouraged people to the point we don't think we can get rid of Tabor, because it would be really, for the average voter to read what Tabor does, they would support it regardless of political affiliation, because like, yeah, I think it's a good idea for me to have, a check on the spending of money. but constitutionally speaking, that's kind of what legislators exist for, is to be their check on the budget. So it's complicated and it's annoying, but I hope one day that we will get it repealed.
Right. Well, thanks again for the question and that conversation. The next person I saw a question come in from is Jan Rose. Okay, Jan, you should be able to unmute yourself now. Go ahead.
Hi, Rep Valdez.
How are you?
I'm great. Good to see you again. Thanks so much for the heavy lifting with you and Rep Sirota on the plastics bill. We have all the ammo to push it through this year. So I will move my question to brand new legislation, and we've got a whole bunch of planned legislation for the built environment. My question is, the existing carbon footprint of our current built environment is around 37 to 40 million metric tons of CO2e coming from buildings. So I appreciate that we're going to set new standards for new buildings going forward. I have not yet seen any planned legislation for how we're going to address the already built environment. And, you know, for example, the most obvious is solar on multi-unit housing that lives right on the light rail line. We've put up all this multi-unit housing right on the light rail line with no incentives to electrify it or put charging stations in. So any idea if there's some planned legislation there?
Good question. I think that we're trying to take kind of initial steps with benchmarking, building benchmarking, which is basically creating disclosure of that energy usage. That's kind of the first step in developing a strategy towards reducing it. And new buildings is just kind of the low-hanging fruit of getting buildings to being better. I think, again, if we were to talk about how to do this, we would be talking again about capital access. It should be less expensive to take out a loan to remodel and do a drastic remodel on a building if you're implementing money-saving features, because it essentially, you know, saves whoever's the operator of that building money that they would then be better and more likely to repay their debt. And so, to me, that is kind of like the energy performance contracting on steroids would be kind of the way to get there, which would be, you know, let's do complex analysis of what kind of savings a building will receive from going through a remodel, and then build a loan around that so that somebody can go ahead and do that and end up with a better building that operates at a much less expensive cost. And so that's a program that we have kind of that we use on a state level to upgrade some of our buildings, and I think that it should be expanded. But I don't know of any imminent legislation to do that. But, you know, I'll be around for a little while, and I'm interested in this for sure.
So as chair of House E&E, do you think you could wrangle up support for the concept of a green bank so that we have a super low interest rate mechanism for funding that kind of stuff for the already built environment?
Great question. I think I've been looking into that. It's a little more complex because of the administration and setup costs and our current budget situation. I think it's possible. I just don't know that it's possible this session, because we're probably going to still be reeling a little bit from the effects of the economic downturn, and we don't want to drive fiscal notes. Programs like that take a little bit of money to set up and then a little bit of money to administrate through the energy office or wherever you would put that. So that is something I'm working on. I just don't know if this is the year.
Okay, thanks so much.
But thank you, Jen. Good to talk.
Thanks so much, Jan. Next I have on the list here, Douglas Aldi, and it looks like you had kind of two comments in here. One, almost a thank you to Alex about citizen lobbying, and then also a question. So feel free to kind of hit both of those when you speak up.
Sure. In fact, I first would like to say thank you to both Alex and Jonathan for this presentation. It's been very informative for me, and I really appreciate it. And I will say I really appreciate, Alex, your service with the legislature. It's not an easy lift, I think. My question is, and this is getting off of state policy, but I'm a volunteer with Citizens Climate Lobby. It's an organization that is trying to promote. I don't know if you're familiar with it. You are. So we promote a policy which puts a price on greenhouse gas emissions, but then the entire revenue is returned, less some administrative costs, returned to families in equal amounts. And the idea here is that as the price of fossil fuel goes up, people, if they want to continue using fossil fuel, they'll be able to afford it because they're getting money back to be able to afford that price. However, as the price gets higher and higher, they will start thinking about alternative ways of using energy. And this does, in fact, encourage the use of alternative energy sources. It's not a complete policy, but it certainly could be a very important central policy. And I think my feeling is that we really have to have nationwide legislation for this. And states can do a lot, but I think our Congress really has to take this on. The question I have is this a policy that would be acceptable to you?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to, obviously, I always say this is kind of boilerplate language. I'd have to read a bill because there's always, the details of everything are very important. But generally speaking, the concept, which sounds very interesting. My Congresswoman, Diana DeGette in Denver, was kind of a big player in the cap and trade argument. I think that is not over. I think there's a possibility that we see the Congress of the United States undertake some really bold action and some stuff that was put on hold. But I do think you're right when it comes to policy, like the one you're speaking of. The federal government would be a great place to get it started. And the truth is they passed cap and trade out of the House in 2012 or 13, maybe 14, I don't know. And it's just sitting. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But generally speaking, I think it's a pretty interesting idea.
In fact, I interfaced directly with Diana DeGette's office, and she is now proposing something called a clean energy standard. And it's effective in the electric sector. They've talked to Xcel, for example, and these electric companies believe it's a reasonable policy, which emissions in the electric sector would be net zero by 2035 under this proposal. So it's a little bit faster than a carbon tax would be. So it might be something to support, but she's doing good work along these lines, and she's trying very hard to get bipartisan support for it. So yeah. That's really important.
I think that she does a good job on this sort of stuff, and I've been pushing her to either get cap and trade done or get something done that creates kind of a secondary market for renewable energy credits. I think that is also a critical piece of kind of getting there. Those of us who are, I guess I'm now an old timer in the solar biz, remember when there was like active rec markets and there was real value behind that, seeing cap and trade coming in the early years of the Obama administration, and it kind of dried up. So I think, whatever federal policy will bring back a marketplace for renewable energy credits is going to only help to get there here on the state level. So good questions, though.
Okay, thank you. I will try and send you some information actually about our bill. So
please do.
If that's interesting for you.
Of course.
Thanks a lot, Douglas, for that question. And I'll jump ahead here because there's a related one. I'm just going to read from one of our members, Greg Winchell, and kind of rephrase it. It says, what is the appetite in Colorado for a price on carbon? And I'll add to that, I've seen in some of the responses to the governor's roadmap calls for kind of a cap and trade program that's just based in the state and kind of setting that carbon price and using those market-based mechanisms to achieve those objectives. Have you seen that type of proposal as well? And are the legislators considering something like that, or still just waiting to see what the regulators do before taking that type of action?
I think it's a great policy. My belief is that due to COVID and just general unease about what action we would take that could stifle business activity, that it would probably not happen in the short term. If you ask people in my caucus who work on environmental policy, would they support that? Absolutely. Generally speaking, would it be the right time to go after on a state level? Probably not, because the narrative right now is getting back on the feet. I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm just saying that's just kind of a short-term reality. But I think once we get on the other side of this surreal situation that the whole world finds itself in, that we need to be having conversations about, hey, if Washington won't do it, which makes it easier for us because then it's the law of the land, the whole country, and businesses don't say, well, I'm going to leave Colorado and I'm going to go to Texas because they don't care about the environment there. We don't want that. So I think there's just like these competing interests, and when you talk about this type of policy in particular, it's really hard to do on a state level, because those state level businesses who are big employers in small communities really have more of a voice. And if the federal government says it, well, hey, you can't really go anywhere and not have that be the law. So I think it needs to be federal action.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It goes back to what you were saying on the plastic bag ban earlier. If everyone plays by the same rules, that's okay. We just agree we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to have lead in gasoline. We're not going to have lead pipes for water, and we all just do that, and may the best company win. So ideally, maybe we do have the federal environment where this could be a real possibility, and I'm certainly hopeful. And now we'll go to Nick. Maybe, I hope I pronounced your name right, with your question. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi. I appreciate this discussion, Alex. This is a terrific forum. I'm learning a lot. The question I had was, and I think your answer, you started to answer it partially, I think, and it probably comes down to finance. But we have a split incentive right now between landlords and tenants, where the renters pay the bills, but the landlords do the capital improvements. And so neither side has really a whole lot of incentive to be efficient or add renewables. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on, what is the solution to that sort of dilemma?
That's a great question, because I have some intimate knowledge of just kind of how that process works, and the conclusion that I've come to in the short term is that that's a utility program. That's an opportunity through their planning that they're going to submit to expand programs that are beneficial to those folks who are going to make those capital improvements on property that they don't live in, right? I think most people think, I'm going to put solar on the house where I actually live because I want to experience the benefits of it. Well, I believe it's the utility who needs to be creating some sort of an incentive for landlords, especially the larger ones, to be moving in this direction. And, we talked about PAYS legislation. I think it's more aimed at individuals, but there's a possibility that you could be talking about those multifamily apartment buildings and some other places where they can use their ability to raise low bonds to say, hey, this is a real opportunity area for us, and we want to make this part of our plan. To be quite honest with you, some of the programs they have right now disincentivize these sorts of improvements for landlords, because the REC agreements that they have people go into, and then I had a constituent call me when a tenant moved in and switched the utility over. The utility, in this case Excel, took or just deleted their entire bank of stored solar and then stopped paying the REC because there was a tenant in there. So I think the utility is the one who would have to, do something to make it a reality. And that doesn't seem to be, at least how things are structured right now, a high priority.
Thanks for the question and the response. Certainly a very, very challenging issue and one that we're going to need creative solutions for. So we've got time, probably about 10 minutes left here before we wrap things up. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us, and everyone for sticking with us throughout this whole event. It's been just a pleasure talking with you, and I think really, really informative for me and everybody else. David Alley, you've got a question. You can unmute yourself. I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear anything. You might have the wrong microphone settings. I'm going to go ahead and read your question for you. So thanks, David, for submitting this. Asking, is legislative action being planned to require greater access to community solar, microgrids, and storage, especially on schools, churches, and community centers in low-income, disproportionately impacted communities?
Good question. I am not aware of any legislation in this coming session that deals with those topics. I know we've made some gains, especially in the community solar space. I know that there's a lot of conversation about situations where, for instance, the metro area is not really, the land value has really shot through the roof as, Colorado is more and more expensive. And, kind of how can we allow, for instance, let's say a community solar garden that's going to serve one building to kind of place their outlay outside of that utility area and then bring it back in. I think that's a transmission issue. So like what we usually have to do to get to the point where we're making real progress on issues like the one that you are interested in is kind of chip away at it and look at kind of what are the fundamentals to making that a reality, and just kind of break down the walls to enabling that sort of development. So I think transmission issues are one of the things that will start this, because if you can buy some, really cheap land out in the sticks and wire that power back into an urban area to serve customer base, then that's good. I think but there's fundamental pieces we have to change about our transmission system and just some of our underlying stuff to get to a point where we have the ability to do that.
And there's a little bit I can speak to this. So part of my job with Denver is, thinking about that. How do we get more solar built actually in the community and making the biggest possible community impact? So I think, David, this kind of goes to what you're asking. How do we get solar on schools and churches, community centers? Denver was actually just selected for 9 community solar projects, up to 4.6 megawatts DC of capacity. And kind of what you're asking about is what we're trying to do. We recognize we've got rec centers, we've got municipal property that can host solar, and by connecting it to the grid, we can then assign that power back to our buildings, but then also to low-income housing and low-income residents, and really support people. And by building in our community, now we can create jobs in our community and have job training programs. By doing solar carports over parking lots, we're not taking up any land that would otherwise be developed into other functional space in the city. And we can put in EV chargers. So now you got solar covering your car where you can plug it in, create jobs, work with schools, work with community organizations to try to hit all these benefits. The challenge that we faced was just being awarded that right to connect to the grid by Xcel. The way that their program is set up doesn't really prioritize those smaller scale local investments, higher cost than building a larger project out in the field somewhere, but we think has kind of additional intangible value that we're creating. So pushing for some of those programmatic changes to say, hey, here's something that we want to see prioritized, maybe not the entirety of community solar doing that, but there should be community solar in communities is our philosophy. And now we're trying to take this to talk with Denver Public Schools and other potential partners to try to take what we and then continue to build on this in the future. So I think it's coming. Talk to your legislators. They might be able to help say, hey, prioritize those investments locally in the program. Call Xcel. And just know I really like where your head's at, and it's a big part of what I'm trying to do every day.
Well, we'll be getting together to talk about what we can do for Denver, but you're right, Denver Housing Authority and some other agencies have done a really good job. And when you bring kind of the authority that comes with being Denver within Excel's territory, you get a lot more yeses than maybe some of the smaller projects. But that's our job as a legislature to really break those walls down. It's something that, I wish there were more hours in the day and we could just get it all done in 1 year.
Yeah. All right, cool. A couple more questions here. Claire Valentine, thanks for your question. You can go ahead and speak up.
Thanks, Jonathan and Alex, for having this conversation. My question actually builds off kind of a point you were just making, Alex, regarding new transmission lines and how they can support integrating renewables. So I guess my question is pretty broad. To build off of that, how do you see new transmission lines playing a role in achieving the state decarbonization goals, and are you expecting to work on any legislation related to that?
Good question. So it's such a complex issue, transmission, because you have, so just to kind of give some perspective, when I was kind of early in the solar industry, I did some work in Texas, and Texas is deregulated, and they have this unique and kind of strange electrical system where the grid itself, the power lines and the infrastructure was a separate entity from the producers of power and the sellers of power, and it was just a really odd thing to see. But it did enable what I thought were some advantages from the renewable space, because then you can really compete to service those homes. You could go subscribe a certain number of people and then build a power plant that use renewables anywhere. And so I think there's discussions going on right now as to how we can start to look at transmission as a part of this picture and how we get there. And to be honest with you, I was just introduced to these concepts relatively recently, but I've been learning them from Senator Chris Hansen, who is a brilliant man and just very versed on transmission issues. I would not be surprised to see legislation in this area, but I definitely have some learning to do where it goes and how we can bring those pieces together to use a transmission system to really bring new players and new renewables to market.
Great. Thanks so much for that. Let's go, Larry Milosevic. So you have a comment, but also a question. And you can unmute and go ahead. Great.
Thanks for all your great work, Representative Valdez. I just wanted to comment that community choice energy, by giving communities more choice and control over their energy sources, would open up market-based competition that complements the current sort of regulation-only approach to decarbonization, which should accelerate it if California's any indication. I'm sorry, I actually didn't really have a question, but you spoke about the importance of constituent voices, and I just wanted to let you know that the CCE study bill is actively supported by the Denver City Council, as well as the CRES Policy Committee and Resilient Denver, and many, many others, including Colorado Municipal League and CC4CA and the Sierra Club, a lot of community-focused organizations. So there's a hunger among communities out there for more choice and control over their energy sources. And I wish I could end with a question, but I don't have one.
That's okay. No, I voted for the bill out of committee last year, and then it just, like so many good pieces of legislation, died on the vine. I think it'll come back and we'll get it done. I will be a yes. So I agree with you. I've seen how it worked in California, and it was good.
Well, thanks, Larry. Thanks, Alex. Patty Sullivan addressing your question, asking for a list of bills to support. If you keep coming to CRES meetings and get on our mailing list, we'll certainly be keeping you informed throughout the session, letting you know when there's good opportunities to call your legislators and get involved. So thank you for your interest there. All right, we've got 2 more that I have in the queue, and then we are done for the night, everyone. So first, Sam Anderson, let me find you and unmute you. All right, you can unmute yourself and then ask your question.
Thank you, Johnny. I understand that District 5 is mostly urban, but the ag sector faces a lot of big challenges already with climate change and the economy, social equity, a lot of different things. And I was wondering if there were any topics on the agenda this year that addresses sustainability and those other issues in rural communities and agriculture, or if there are any issues you'd like to be working on.
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that I've noticed just through my work over the years is that, you know, Colorado has a few publicly regulated utilities and just a gaggle of cooperatives and rural electric associations and a number of different things that have varying degrees of difficulty for their subscribers to get involved with being a part of the solution. But so to answer your question, yeah, I kind of have a dream that one day some of our ag folks will say, you know, I like being in ag, but it would be a lot easier if I could just lay a couple of megawatts out there and sell that to the utility or whatever and use my land to generate power. But right now, again, it's the transmission issue and the fact that a lot of those folks that would do that are captive within these rural electric associations that just aren't very amenable to renewables at this point. So the answer to both of your questions is yes. Yes, there's great opportunity, and yes, I would like to work on finding a way to enable small-scale producers to be a part of the plan, because I think there's a lot of folks who may make that switch, but also agribusiness in general can be a large emitter of greenhouse gases. If it's a, you know, for instance, like a dairy farm or a cattle operation or whatever, and I'm a city folk, so I don't even know what it's properly called, but there are real opportunities to offset greenhouse gases there. I've seen in California where they built these big hoods to capture methane, but, you know, and then they burned it for power, which was really interesting. But there are opportunities there. And I think what we need to do is just find a way to break down the walls of prohibition for renewables within some of these areas, and then look longer term. Hey, how do we create incentives for rural folks to be a part of this?
Thanks for that. And then we got one more before we turn it back over to Lindsay for the closing remarks. And thanks again, everyone, for sticking with us. Susan McFadden, you can unmute yourself. Last but not least.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, Alex. Thanks so much for doing this tonight. You were saying that access to capital is a big barrier to getting more renewable and energy efficiency. So there's 2 mechanisms, which is the low-income tax credit provides 30 to 60% of the equity for affordable housing. So we can just say that any developer that gets low-income tax credits would have to do DOE 0, some kind of energy efficiency and renewable energy in order to get the low-income tax credit. And that could be something that could be legislated. And the same thing with metro districts. Instead of borrowing infrastructure money at 18%, they're borrowing it at 4%. And so they should be required to do energy efficiency and renewable energy to get that cheap capital.
I mean, those are both amazing ideas. We need to get together and talk more about them. I think the first thought I have with the low income, you know, builders tax credit is, would they be in the same sort of situation with being kind of embargoed on their net metering situation because they would fall outside of the regulated utilities? But
No.
That sounds like a great idea. Areas where we're already having influence, and I said this when I was talking about state buildings, those are kind of the low hanging fruit for us, because we can just say, yeah, this is the way we need to do it. And that low income tax credit sounds like the same thing. So shoot an email to me, Sue, and we'll get together and talk more about it, because that sounds pretty straightforward. And, you know, we're always looking for ideas. And for those of you who don't know Sue, you should. She knows what she's talking about.
Thanks, Alex. We'll
Of course,
talk soon.
good talking.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Alex. It really has been a privilege having you with us tonight, having this conversation. It's been, I've enjoyed it thoroughly. I think our members have gotten a lot out of it, and I really appreciate you staying on for as long as you have. I think I've gone a few minutes over here, so sorry about that.
It's been my pleasure, Johnny. Thank you, and thank you to everybody at CRES for the work you do. And if Laurent Mellon is on here, I owe you a call. I'll call you back. I didn't forget. And I really do appreciate all the work you do and your membership very much. So I'll look forward to seeing you all happy and healthy down at the Capitol once we get vaccinated and get back to normal. So, but thank you for the opportunity, and have a really great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay healthy, take care, and Lindsay, take it home.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much, Johnny. I really very much enjoyed the discussion and very much appreciated you taking the time to be here with us tonight and to educate me and the rest of our members. So with that, just a quick reminder, we hope to see you again on Thursday, February 18th. And look forward to continuing a great year of programming, maybe with the end of the year culminating in an in-person event once we are vaccinated. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you very much again, Alex, and I hope to see you all soon.